Hi there, and welcome to the pilot episode, or episode 1 of Maritime Paranormal Chat. My name is Raven, and we're podcasting from beautiful Prince Edward Island, Canada, which is part of the Maritime Provinces, which also includes Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Now, for those of you not familiar with the geographical layout of Canada, we're on the east coast. Prince Edward Island, of course, separated from the mainland, but we are joined to the mainland by one of the biggest bridges in the world, called Confederation Bridge. Just a little bit about me. I have loved the paranormal from as far back as I can remember. I've had some interesting unexplained events happen to me throughout my past, which I'll be sharing at some point throughout this episode or future episodes. I also want to hear from you, as one of the things we'll be examining are stories of people's encounters that are paranormal, unexplained, or just plain weird. So eventually I'll have guests on the show, either talking by phone, in person, or sharing their written account of what's happened to them. And who knows, maybe it'll be you at some point. I also have a background in psychology and world religions, so I'm very familiar with how the mind works in regards to fear and perceiving events which may be interpreted as paranormal. In a lot of cases, there's a perfectly logical explanation for the strange things we encounter, so we may even be able to shed some light on what may have happened and possibly even offer some sort of an explanation. Now, having said that, I don't pretend to know all the answers, and I absolutely love a good mystery as much as the next person. So keep in mind, if you want to share your story, the creepier, definitely, the better. Also, throughout this podcast series, we'll be reviewing some relevant movies and documentaries, anything having to do with horror, thrillers, suspense, anything relevant to the topic on hand. We'll also examine stories circulating through social media like Facebook and YouTube, or basically anything at all on the internet, and lots of stuff on there as well. We'll also be looking at local haunted locations, as well as famous cases all over the world, and I'll probably have a co-host at some point, or at least a guest host. Definitely a guest host. I think that'd be a lot of fun to bounce ideas off of each other and see what happens. Coming up on this episode, though, we're going to be looking at something called the Dungarvin Whooper, which took place in New Brunswick, Canada, just across the bridge. But first, what do you do when your chimney and stove start talking to you, even after you've stopped doing the crack? Well, we're going to find out, as that's apparently exactly what happened to a family in Spain back in 1934. We'll have details when we return to Maritime Paranormal Chat. But first, for those of you who aren't familiar, there's a lot of interest in the Missing 411 book and video series by David Paulides, which basically deals with strange disappearances that occur all over the world, but mostly in the U.S. national parks, more specifically Yosemite National Park. These are actual cases of ordinary people who've disappeared under extremely unusual circumstances, in most cases never to be seen again. The small number of those that are found are usually deceased, too young, or too disoriented to make any coherent account of what happened. There's also a lot of videos on YouTube that address this, and if you're interested in purchasing any of the Missing 411 books or videos, you can go to www.canammissing.com. Taking us up to our first story, here's the trailer for one of the 3 movies he has out so far. It's called Missing 411: The Hunted. The other 2 are called Vanished and Missing 411. To see the complete trailer with video attached, just do a search on YouTube. Right now, here we go. We'll be right back.
Mysterious disappearances.
Tom, you around?
When missing, simply vanished.
Generally speaking, hunters are very experienced and knowledgeable outdoorsmen. And so when one vanishes, you know something unusual has occurred.
As a hunter, you're like, I'm fine, I'm armed, I'm safe. There's no reason for why these people go missing.
They never found anything. Not the walkie-talkie, not his gun, nothing.
Obviously, an animal didn't get to it because there'd be a big scatter. Bees to find.
The FBI doesn't investigate missing adults. So then why would the FBI arrive on Tom Messick's case?
When you see hundreds of victims scattered throughout our national forests and national parks, you have to question the reality of it.
So he could have made fire. He had a gun, he could have signaled help. What happened to him?
I like to know, but I don't think we ever will.
Whatever it is big, and we started recording them.
Frequencies go way above and way below the abilities of humans.
I look, I'm thinking, what is this thing in the trees? It went from like tree to tree, and then it disappeared.
Is it possible for an 82-year-old man to simply vanish while sitting alone in the woods? Can a man with severe hypothermia hike 6 miles through snow with no shoes? This is one of those recurring phenomena. It's going to happen again. It's just a matter of time.
None of it makes any sense.
So we're back with Paranormal Chat in the case of the talking chimney or talking stove, whichever you prefer. I'm going to try to make this creepier by talking lower like this, and we'll see if we can maybe add some creepy music as well, just to heighten the effect of scaring the crap out of you. Toots, can you give me some creepy music here? Toots McGee, by the way, is my sound guy. Oh, there we go. Okay, so let's begin. So in 1934, police in a town called Zaragoza, Spain, were called in by a deeply concerned and visibly distraught family. It seemed an uninvited guest had been terrorizing them for several weeks and simply refused to leave their house or leave them alone. Greeted at the front door by Mrs. Palazon, who by now thought she was already losing her mind, the chief of police wasted no time with starting his investigation. He began questioning the suspect right away by asking such simple questions as, "Who are you? Why are you doing this? What do you want?" He only got one simple answer from the other party in return, a simple no. He then asked again, "What are you looking for? Are you looking for work?" Yet the answer once again was a cool, short, and straightforward no. Annoyed now, and with his patience running thin, the policeman repeated his questions. "I said, who are you? What is it that you want?" The answer to this question was what actually made this case so interesting, even up to 85 years later, after it happened. The reply was simply, "Nothing. I am not a man," from what seemed to be an ordinary chimney. Yes, the policeman was talking to a chimney, one that had a special connection to the kitchen stove. Only it wasn't such an ordinary chimney, because it was talking back, not only to the Palazon family, but apparently also to the neighbors. It was not like the case of the seemingly talking chimney in Morganton, North Carolina at the beginning of the 20th century. Oh no, that chimney had actually turned out to be picking up family quarrels, church music, and workshop noise from around the area through echoes in the sewage system. This case was much different. This chimney was asking questions, and it was also answering questions as well. It turns out it was a rude, ill-mannered, and insolent chimney that at one point even threatened to do away with everyone in the room. It all started one day in September when the Palazons first heard maniacal male laughter that was emanating from behind the walls in the kitchen of their duplex apartment on what was then Gaskin Goder Street. At first, they assumed that the neighbors were the ones causing the ruckus, as there were screams, shrieks, and all kinds of different unidentified noises along with the laughter that would come and go seemingly out of nowhere, and it only got louder when the family opened the stove. This all started on the evening of September 27th, when the maid, Pascuala Alcacer, was in the kitchen finishing up with the dishes when she heard the voice calling her name, followed by a burst of prolonged, sinister laughter. Scared out of her wits by this, she woke up her boss to tell her what had happened. For the next couple of days, the voice would appear randomly, sometimes as early as 5 a.m., often calling out to the maid as if it had some strange fixation with her. Occasionally, it would just tease people when they approached the kitchen. It was like it was an all-seeing entity, fully aware of everything that went on in the house, especially in front of its own home, now the talking stove. The Palazons were almost certain that an invisible duende, or a goblin-like supernatural being from Spanish and Latin American folklore, was for some reason living inside their stove and talking through the chimney. They told their neighbors and asked for help, at least to ease their minds so that they knew they weren't going crazy. Intrigued, they came over, and what do you think would happen? But the voice would greet them with a simple, friendly hello. So crazy, the family definitely wasn't. With little options of what to do next, the troubled family called the police. Word about an invisible goblin living on Gaskin Street had spread throughout the neighborhood like wildfire. so the police came to check out the outlandish claim. It wouldn't be till mid-November when the first conversation between the police force and the chimney took place. To their surprise, each officer was greeted by name by the strange voice as they entered the kitchen. Baffled, but believing it was just an elaborate hoax, the police arranged for the Palazons to be relocated to another residence while the apartment was thoroughly investigated. From the moment people living next door heard about the family moving out, mass hysteria soon followed and spread throughout the community. It would become a nationwide sensation in 1934 as hundreds flocked the street from every corner of the city to see, or maybe even communicate with the talking stove. Even the London Times began to cover the story, and a radio station from Barcelona was tempted enough to try and set up a microphone for a live radio broadcast with the stove's chimney as a talk show guest. The case was the talk of what previously was a very pleasant but nonetheless a very boring town, and over the course of the next couple of weeks, the Times wrote at least a dozen articles about almost everything that went on there. In their first article, for instance, was titled "A Polite Spanish Ghost," released on November 24th, 1934, as they reported that at first a team of architects and construction workers were sent in to inspect the whole building, but could not find anyone anywhere. Reportedly, when the architect suggested his men measure the chimney opening, a voice simply said, "You need not trouble yourselves. The diameter is exactly 6 inches. It turns out the voice was exactly right. The police evacuated the building and brought in the army to cut off all electric and telecommunications from the outside. A police patrol was then assigned to guard the perimeter both day and night and not let anyone or anything slip through. Right from the very next morning, the voice was nowhere to be heard. Nothing was ever found either. Priests were called in to sprinkle the chimney with holy water, and the Palazons were brought back under the assumption that whoever was making fools out of them, or whatever, was gone now, with all the army and the police around. Cowards, 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 here I am, was how they were greeted the very next morning after moving back into their home. I'm going to kill everyone inside, said the voice as they returned, and the family swiftly left the apartment once again, only this time they'd never return. The governor of Zaragoza, upon hearing that the voice had returned, ordered the police chief to bring the whole family in for questioning and psychiatric evaluation. On December 4th, the governor released a statement that the family maid was the responsible party. She was, he alleged, suffering from a highly unusual and bizarre condition called unconscious ventriloquism, apparently throwing her voice unknowingly. Even though she was nowhere near the apartment for most of the time after the first few encounters, and people swore they heard the voice, even when she was not around, the blame was still firmly placed on Pensacola Alcacer. The family she worked for left town, never to be seen there again, and the voice was last heard on that fateful December 4th. The apartment block was eventually torn down, but not until 40 years later, and a new building on the site was named Edificio Duende, or the Goblin Building. So was the whole thing a hoax? Well, no one seems to know for sure. No one ever stepped forward to take responsibility, and it was never clearly demonstrated how anyone could handle such an elaborate hoax over such a long period of time, especially back in 1934. And if unconscious ventriloquism was the actual cause, there probably hasn't been another case like it before or since. So there you have the case of the talking chimney and stove. Now, I haven't been able to find anything online about unconscious ventriloquism that doesn't already pertain to this case, but there are many reported cases over the years where people develop alternate personalities, such as in cases of alleged possession or psychological disorders like dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. Now, whether or not those cases are relevant in regards to this story is anybody's guess, as we really don't have enough information to base any valid conclusions. For instance, did the maid have any psychological conditions? And we also know very little about her or the family's character. Also, the story's been told many, many times over in the past 26 years since it happened, and as we all know, the more a story gets told, the more it tends to change. Now, we may just have to accept the fact that we may never know what actually happened in that quiet, peaceful village of Zaragoza all those years ago. Don't go away. We'll be back. But first, if you are looking for a truly creepy documentary, I highly recommend watching or reading the book for Hunt for the Skinwalker, both book and DVD available now at Amazon.ca and Amazon.com. For more than 50 years, the bizarre events at this remote Utah ranch have ranged from the perplexing to the wholly terrifying. Vanishing and mutilated cattle, unidentified flying objects, poltergeist activity, the appearance of huge otherworldly creatures. We'll get more in depth with this topic in a later episode, but for now, here's the trailer, and don't forget to check it out with video in its entirety on YouTube. Here we go.
The global public is not ready to have global confirmation of this. A lot of disturbing things will occur. It's just too powerful.
Skinwalker Ranch. This is like the Area 51 of the paranormal.
It was not a single phenomenon. There were a host of things that happened.
Have there been experiences there that have shaken the Pentagon and CIA and other agencies? Absolutely.
Nobody knows what we're dealing with. That's the bottom line. Nobody knows.
This is 30 or 40 hours of material that the public has never seen before.
They saw this humanoid creature crawling through this tunnel, hovering 4 feet above the ground.
Something forced 4 2,000-pound bulls to cram themselves into this trailer without opening this door. It's completely impossible.
I've seen things that I can't explain.
This was one of the most surprising things that we recorded right after I purchased the ranch.
Is it real?
Oh, yes, I believe it is.
Something is here.
These are real, tangible, physical events. This is game-changing.
It's one thing to be reading about UFOs or other realities or interdimensionals. It's another thing to be staring at it right in the face.
Oh, God.
Hi, welcome back to Maritime Paranormal Chat. My name is Raven, and our next story takes place in the late 1800s in New Brunswick, Canada. Now, there's been several different versions of this story over the years, but the one I'm about to share is the most common, popular, and most accepted version. In the Dungarvin River region in central New Brunswick, Canada, in the late 19th century, a young cook, often referred to as Ryan, hired himself out to work in a lumber camp near the Dungarvin River. It's been said that when he arrived at camp, he brought all his worldly possessions with him. Around his waist was fastened a money belt stuffed with coins and large bills. Nobody in the camp ever found out where he got all the money, but Ryan made no secret of the fact that he had plenty of it. Ryan is described as a handsome guy who was tall and strong with ruddy cheeks and black curly hair. He was well liked, and he could hoop and holler better than anyone else in the camp. And a good strong shout was a characteristic much valued and admired among woodsmen at the time. Every morning Ryan was the first one up, as it was his job to prepare breakfast and fill all the lumbermen's lunch pails with bread and salt pork. Then he would let out a tremendous ear-splitting whoop to get everyone up. After breakfast, the men would go off to work, leaving young Ryan alone at the camp. On the fateful day this legend was born, it was a tragic and unlucky day for Ryan, as on this particular morning the camp boss decided that he would stay with the young cook. The boss was somewhat of a stranger to the men in camp, but he was also respected, and his orders were always obeyed. Later in the afternoon, when the men returned, they found young Ryan lying lifeless on the floor. It was determined that he was dead, and his money belt was missing, never to be seen again. When asked what had happened, the boss said Ryan had simply taken sick suddenly and died. No one dared question him further, but the rest of the woodsmen were always suspicious about the boss after that, as no money belt was there to be found. That night a raging storm would sweep upon the camp, making it impossible to leave, so the men buried the poor cook in a shallow grave in the forest. As they trudged back to the camp, they stopped dead in their tracks, for above the howling and moaning of the wind came the most dreadful whoops and screams anyone has ever heard. It continued all that night, driving the men crazy with fear. They left camp at the crack of dawn the next morning, never to return. For years after Ryan's death, the haunting sounds continued in that area of the forest until a priest from a town called Renew named Father Murdoch was asked to put the poor spirit to rest. From over Ryan's wilderness grave, Father Murdoch performed the necessary funeral service, finishing with a blessing of the area. Some say Father Murdoch succeeded in quieting the ghost, but others in the area would swear that the fearful cries of Ryan could still be heard and continues to this very day. It's also worthy of note that the nickname Dungarvin Whooper was later given to a numbered passenger train operated by the Canadian Eastern Railway running from Newcastle to Fredericton, along the southwest Miramichi River. It's also been said that it earned the name because the sound of the steam locomotive whistle reminded local residents of the legend. The railway and its passenger service were later absorbed into the Canadian National Railway system, and the passenger train ceased operation altogether in the early 1960s. So having said that, that will conclude our pilot episode of Maritime Paranormal Chat. Please feel free to let me know what you think. All future episodes will be approximately 1 hour or more. This podcast will be posted along with any others I do on our Facebook group page for PEI Maritime Paranormal Chat. I'm going to leave you with some music from one of my all-time favorite movies, horror movies that is, which is considered to be a horror movie classic. If you can guess where it's from, then you'll definitely have my respect as a true blue horror movie fan. I'll reveal the movie next episode. Till next week, have a great week, take care, and peace out.